All right, welcome everyone to the Connect Tech Chat Center. I'm Steve Reynolds. I'm the president at Imagine Communications, and today I'm going to be moderating a panel with a couple of guests. And the title of the panel is The Mission to Move to IP. The gentlemen who are joining me today are all involved in projects that are being done in the house of worship space. So that's, an area of the video industry that we've seen a lot of growth in over the course of just the last couple of years. Obviously a very important content segment and a lot of very loyal followers of those kinds of things. And what we wanted to talk about today was really how that segment is starting to adopt some of the IP media technologies that we've seen throughout the rest of the video industry. So let me introduce my esteemed guests here. We have Keith Vidger, who is a principal technology consultant in media entertainment for Panasonic. Gil Parente, who is the CEO and owner of AVnew. And Chris Winnie, who's a senior systems engineer at Skylark. These guys all worked together on a project that got done, actually just finished up recently, with Skylark Church in Texas. So there'll be some things that we can share, practical wisdom, let's call it, right? Things that have been learned. So I'm going to start the panel off. Chris, with you. As an integrator, what are you seeing in the market with the pace of IP and 2110 adoption and the kinds of projects that you've been working on?
Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of movement towards IP gateway, IP processing, in software-based processing instead of generic hardware being FPGA-based. That gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to multiviewers, applying proc amps, stuff like that to modify the color of your video streams, being able to mitigate between primary and secondary feeds and having automatic failover instead of in the generic baseband scenario where you would have to split each signal however many times you need to, do all the processing and bring it back into a single endpoint. With 2110 for House of Worship, there is no more need of that. It's just a single workflow to make it simple.
Well, so boil that down to the benefit to the customer. What is the thing that they're getting out of that? Is it really just simplicity?
It's going to be simplicity, but also probably a cheaper and faster workflow at the end of the day. There's no more needing to buy multiple Vidger cards to accomplish one thing. You can just buy one piece of hardware, send 16 feeds into it, do all the processing and output it with very little latency at a software level.
Gil, same question to you. What are you guys seeing in terms of the adoption of IP, especially in this house of worship space?
Yeah, I think what happens is the church was already used to an IP centric audio solution, right? That's been adopted a long time ago. Yeah. And then finally now it's been happening in the video, and the same benefits the parallel benefits that happen in the audio industry are also now happening in the video industry with what Chris said, processing being centralized and much easier to get to, less physical product that's needed to accomplish the same things. The benefits of infrastructure that can be ever growing and future proofing. So many things like that we've seen the house of worship market kind of adopting that, seeing the benefits, being able to see those benefits and be able to kind of taking it on and taking advantage of them.
Yeah, that point about expandability, I think, is actually a really key one. Can you talk a little bit about why 2110 provides better expandability or perhaps more cost-effective expandability?
Sure. I think what it brings to the infrastructure of the space is the ability, because it's all IP-based and based on network switches, it gives us the ability to use either existing cabling infrastructure or adding new cable infrastructuring and keep on adding as time progresses to be able to get to, if you're adding a different room to your facility, if you have even adding a different building to the facility, you're just adding on to an infrastructure that already exists without having to create a whole new infrastructure from scratch. So having that capability, and basically your limitation is just how many network switches you can put in the system and the bandwidth that those network switches can handle. But usually even that, you can expand on those and be able to kind of like not have a stop. You're not blocked into a specific infrastructure or a maximum number of anything that you can do because everything is based on an IT infrastructure.
Yeah, I actually want to return to that point in a second about how you guys have been using the off-the-shelf switches. We're going to talk about that in 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
But before we go on to that, Keith, you guys obviously, doing a lot of work in the kind of production side of things from Panasonic. What do you see in the 2110 space, and how do you see that translating into benefits for the House of Worship customers?
So great questions, by the way. Number one, 2110 is picking up steam. It's started off kind of a slow pace some time ago, lack of understanding, which one of the reasons, but for lots of great reasons, it's basically picking up steam. People are loving it. And initially, I always thought of it as a broadcast-only type infrastructure. No one else would have the expertise to do it. No one else would be able to implement it. And maybe houses of worship would be the last to implement. But in reality, that's not the case. And some of the first people to implement 2110 were houses of worship. Some of the first people to understand the benefits and extol the virtues of 2110 also in that market. So, we often think of broadcast and corporate and house of worship as all being disparate things. But really, they have more in common than they don't. They want to produce the best possible show with the most flexibility. They want the greatest ability to expand into the future. They all share that in common. And 2110 is what the biggest thing is. Well, I should say the biggest thing that leads people to do that is that trifecta of things. The best production value with the best expandability and the most flexibility. So that's what they love.
Well, so say a little bit more about why you see that higher quality. What is it about 2110 that really enables the kind of high value production that you're talking about?
So in just about every kind of production value environment, the more sources you have, the more you can reach out to, the more you can connect that are perhaps further and farther away. That all increases the value of your show. 2110 enables that. It's one of the biggest differentiators between 2110 and SDI. How far away can you reach to get the content into your show, into your switcher, your router, whatever? 2110 significantly improved upon SDI in infrastructure capacity. And that's what people really love about it. And once the signals get in, the ability to, once again, spit them out and have them go to a far-flung audience, to be able to expand your routing capacity, as was said, in an inexpensive way that would simply be cost prohibitive in an SDI world. And not the least of which, think about any technology that you're using in a production now that was invented in the 80s. I would dare say there's not a single thing that you're implementing now that was invented except for SDI. It was invented and implemented in 1989 and years developed before that. It's kind of funny that we still rely on that as the backbone of a lot of production, yet it's decades old. 2110 is the modern version of that allows us to do all the things we need to do in the modern world to match. Think of any show you saw from the 80s compared to what we produce now. There's no similarity other than production value in general terms, lighting and camera angles, something like that. But other than that, we're so far beyond that. 2110 brings it to life.
Yeah, that's great. So better quality, more flexibility, more scalability. I mean, all of those are the reasons I think, we've seen such great adoption. And I love the point that you're making about how that extends into almost every market. It's really not just a broadcast only technology. I will say though that one of the things that we often hear people talk about with 2110 is there's a perception that it doesn't scale down very well. It's too expensive of a solution, and it's not really well suited to some of these kinds of applications we've been talking about. Chris, when we were prepping for the panel, you had a couple of thoughts about that, and we were talking about just how well 2110 really can scale down. What do you see as being the price point of where 2110 is more cost effective or perhaps less cost effective than an SDI solution? Where is it at these days?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting concept of you have a baseband router that might be able to support 288 squared, right? But then when you look at doing that in a 2110 infrastructure with today's network switches, either Netgear, Mellanox, Dell has their own, Cisco, Arista, you judge your flexibility based off how big you really want to get. Okay, 2110 can be as simple as just point A to point B with one stream and that's it, right? Or you can be as complex as you want with a pretty hefty backbone of networking, and you can have 3,000 squared all sitting in one network switch, right? So if you look at like an FR12 from Ross, you've got well over 288, but that takes up 12 RU of rack space. Now in a single 1 RU switch, I can have well over 3,000 cross points happening at a -20, -30, and -40 instance of 2110. So as network switches drop in cost, right? Like Netgear released their 2110 switches that are full 2500 gig backbone, and you can get them for almost 10 grand, right? Or you can go to Arista and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a 2110 backbone that does very similar things. You're looking at your application. So in reality, if you're going from point A to point B and you're doing 16 flows of data, it might not make sense to get a massive backbone. But that's what is wonderful about where the industry is going. Everyone's making these products that's cross-compatible with whatever you're trying to accomplish. And as long as they obey by the standards that SMPTE has set for all this, you can scale it however you need to and still be perfectly fine. Your failure rate can still be really low because SMPTE has protocols in place along with network protocols for that redundancy. So that's the ultimate thing when it comes to like House of Worship, is getting that message out there, getting the stream out there. 2110 has that instance where you can do that and still keep the cost low. Or you can do that at a massive scale and do it in what the industry would say the right way and spend that money, but you get that reliability of saying, hey, pastor's on stage, that stream is going to hit Facebook no matter what, right? Or, hey, I've got a second campus 80 miles away. I can do a dark fiber tunnel, get that signal there in literally a quarter of a second, if that. And you know that redundancy is put in place, so that signal is always getting there, no problems, right? So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to cost and what vendors are doing, right? More and more people that enter this market, the cost is going to drop that much more. And so that's the true benefit here. It's a standard that everyone is trying to obey by. Everyone's trying to do it, so it's keeping the cost low instead of bringing it up.
Yeah, I think that is key, that interoperability that you're talking about, because there are so many different vendors that have adopted and integrated together to support this 2110 environment. That definitely has a positive impact on the availability of technology, but also the price point, as you've been talking about. Gil, from your point of view, we talked a little bit about that interoperability, but there's also an important aspect of that with hybrid. So where do you see 2110 fitting in, and how do you see taking advantage of the hybrid capabilities in order to support more of your customers?
Yeah, for sure. So we found that the entry point for 2110 used to be pretty high, a few years ago. And now today, with what Chris said, the availability of all these products that are coming out, switches that are lower priced, even gateways that are lower priced. Well, we found that even the facilities, the churches that can't jump in all into a full infrastructure redo, we throw a hybrid approach where we'll have some parts of the system, without getting into crazy details, some part of the systems that are operating in the 2110 platform and 2110 infrastructure, and they're connected to the existing baseband infrastructure for routing and distribution and other scenarios, even inputs from camera locations that are already wired. And then the idea is we start off with that slightly smaller, 2110 infrastructure that's only handling certain aspects of the system. And then we can easily grow into gradually upgrading the rest of the system to become 2110, compatible, to become 2110 capable, and be able to eventually get to a full 2110 deployment. And that part of the, design aspect of doing a hybrid system is what helps the entry point, even for the medium and smaller size churches, to be able to jump into that and build, kind of like start that, future proofing part of the design right away without having to wait to be able to afford the whole infrastructure again. So for us, a hybrid is a very important part of our design philosophy for those medium and smaller size facilities that can, don't want to spend that full infrastructure money right now.
Yeah, and that ability to gradually migrate towards and adopt that as you expand, I think that probably is a key reason why people are considering hybrid as an approach. Although, Chris, I think it does represent a challenge, though, right? Because then you have to be careful that you don't get into situations where you've got a blocking architecture.
Yeah, one of the worst things for a house of worship is being blocked in. Right. The idea of making the dollar go the extra mile really speaks volumes in house of worship. So to have an infrastructure that can be non-blocking, so if pastor wants whatever in his green room, you can make that happen. right? Or someone needs to set up an overflow room in another venue, you can make it happen. You're not stuck with, oh no, I'm out of outputs, right? 2110 eliminates that concept of, I don't have any more outputs on my router. What do I do? Okay. Back when baseband was a thing, you would either have to add another router and add tie lines back and forth and hope that those tie lines never get full. But 2110, there is no more tie lines, right? There is no nothing. So I have a non-blocking infrastructure, gives the end user the ultimate power of making the flexibility whenever they need to. So that's the trade-offs of being hybrid versus being full 2110 or being full baseband. It's a physical limitation where now we're starting to move into, it's more of a software limitation, when it comes to infrastructure.
So let's go back to the matter of interoperability for a second. Keith, I know that's something that's really important for Panasonic, but where would you say the market is right now, and especially for applications in this segment? What are you seeing in terms of interoperability, and how well is the industry supporting that?
Another great question. So, number one, interoperability is certainly important. The promise, if you will, of 2110, besides all the infrastructure concepts, further reach and things of that nature, not running out, is the idea that you can connect in a way that you couldn't do before. That, baseband sounds comforting in some regard, and in the other sense, it means you're dumbing down something to a lowest common denominator. We don't want to do that in the production world. We want everything to function at its best level all the time and simply be utilized at its best level. So 2110 is capable of doing that, which means from an interoperability standpoint, we can talk to everybody at their best level. This resolution, that frequency, whatever it happens to be, now and into the future, up to 8K, all can work with whatever manufacturer is making whatever thing and bring it into, for example, a switcher that's also capable of doing 2110. So 2110 gives us that, and more than just the idea. All right, video's coming in. Don't forget there's audio in there too. Does that be de-embedded or re-embedded? All that is super easy. Ancillary data is also there, but also from a routing standpoint that makes things elegant. The ability to simply subscribe to a particular source, again, controlling something via NMOS, for example, so easy in a way that you needed output servers before to make a router talk to a switcher and stuff. Super complex. Now it's a simple programming concept. When I say programming, typing in IP addresses. So there's an elegance to 2110 from an interoperability standpoint that SDI never had, and will never have, frankly.
So we're starting to get a pretty long list of benefits here, right? We've got, it's more affordable, it's more expandable, it's more flexible, it's more interoperable. But one thing we should definitely talk about is it more reliable? Because at the end of the day, what really matters is, are we going to get that signal out to the people that want to watch it? So Chris, I'm going to start down at your end on that question. How do you design for reliability and redundancy, and what are some of the key advantages with 2110 in affecting those kinds of designs?
Yeah, so I look at video almost as if I do for Dante, right? Dante supports primary and secondary connections and everything, and if you utilize it, it works. It is flawless, and the implications of what Dante has done to House of Worship has exploded, right? So if we take that same mindset and move it into 2110 as it is extremely stable, right? You don't have to have a -7 infrastructure and still enjoy everything that 2110 offers, right? But the one thing that I would probably say in that is, in House of Worship, you gotta make sure that the systems that you deploy work all the time, right? You never want to go to leadership and be like, oh no, I need to spend another $50,000 because I lost X and now I can't get your service out there, right? So one of the great things that 2110 brings to the table is true redundancy from point A to point B over 2 dedicated networks. And you can also add network protocols in place where you can get even more levels of redundancy down chain, all based off your generic design. And so that's one of the nice things about where 2110 is now you don't have to split an SDI signal anymore, right? In baseband, you would have to take your camera feed, for example, feed it into an open gear card, let it DA it, send it through 2 different routers, all the way down chain to wherever that needs to get, and then bring it back into another open gear card that can do checks and balances and pick the most reliable SDI stream. In 2110, there is no more of that. Right? If you deploy a proper -7 network, -7 equipment, and it does true hitless switching, the end user would never know that the A side of the network went down mid-program, right? Or the B side went down mid-program. Or what if you have a PTP failure within your network? Well, the end user would never know that once a network went down, you had engineers in there working on it. They bring it back up mid-production. No one knows, right? And so that's the benefits of doing true redundancy that 2110 offers. Is now it's at the device level. It's no longer having to add extra pieces of gear to the workflow that potentially could also fail.
Yep.
And you would struggle to figure that part out as well.
So we're going to have to wrap it up here, and I just do want to finish up by giving each one of you an opportunity. One sentence answer, keep it short because we're running out of time. But if someone is considering using 2110 for an HOW project, what's the number one reason that they should go in that direction? Keith, you get to go first.
Future-proofing, one word.
Future-proofing, I love it. Gil?
2 words, flexibility and future-proofing.
All right.
I'm going to have to go with reliability.
Reliability. All right. Well, there you have it from the experts. These guys are going to stick around for a couple of minutes. If you have any questions, just grab us when we go off stage. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and I hope you learned a lot.